All right, today we are going to talk about something that you guys have been asking me to talk about. Now hold on, if you're like, oh no, I don't use Photoshop, I use Capture One, I use Lightroom, etc. If you're just using the raw edit, you have no idea how much you're missing out on, because these raw editors, people often compare them to Photoshop. And I'm including old versions, non-subscription versions of Photoshop, like CS6. I am a PPA master photographer, but as the creator of Seim FX tools, I'm also an expert in Lightroom presets, Capture One styles, and Photoshop actions. And that's where these really behind the scenes tips I'm going to give you today, because I've been getting questions about how people can use these more. We're going to talk about the most important panel across all of Photoshop, but most people have absolutely no idea how powerful it is. And I have spent the past 15 plus years digging into every possible thing we can do with this panel in Photoshop. When I go out to a session, and it doesn't matter if I'm in some beautiful landscape or I'm photographing a beautiful model or doing a wedding or whatever I'm doing, I go out to these sessions, I'm taking these photos and I'm composing and I'm seeing shadow and light like we talk about all the time in Shadow Hackers Workshop. And by the way, I'll put a link to Shadow Hackers in the description. Come to my next free class if you've never been. It'll blow your mind. And then I come back and I edit with presets and Lightroom and Capture One and all this stuff. And most of the photos we do, that works fine. But almost all of the best photos that I've ever printed, all the photos that have ever won competitions, those always went to Photoshop. Those always had layer level refinement. People will say, well, no, we can do layers now in Lightroom and Capture One. Not even remotely the same. So a lot of you have already discovered that actions are still the bomb, because Photoshop's kind of complex and hard. And by using actions, you can do complex things quickly. So let's jump right in. Regardless of whether you use my actions, you're going to be able to implement this knowledge of actions. The actions panels over here, you can turn it on and off in Photoshop from the window menu. Now, in terms of how to install my actions and things like that, I'm not going to get into that here, because you can go to seimfx.com/help and there's videos on how to do that. So for the moment, let's assume that you have my actions or someone's actions or your own actions installed. A lot of times what happens when people start using my actions, like Pictorialist or Blackroom or Lumist, I'll put links to all the things I'm mentioning today in the description if you want to check them out. But this video really focuses on just how powerful of things you can do with actions in Photoshop. And this is why people will come to me and say, oh, can we do this effect in Lightroom? And I'm like, no, Lightroom and Capture One don't have near the capabilities to do that. Think about how you use Lightroom, for example. Maybe you make a preset or you have a preset that adjusts the curve. So let's come to the actions panel. You can see I'm in button mode, and this allows you to just click and use them kind of like a panel. But let's go out of button mode, and this is where we can manage and move and delete actions and things like that. But I could go down here to this little folder and click it, and I could make a new action set, let's say. So I could start building my own actions. I now have this folder here, and I could click the plus down at the bottom, and I could say, okay, let's make a new action and put it inside this test set. So essentially what we're doing is we're recording a script, but Photoshop, because it has so much more power than raw editors like Lightroom or Capture One, you can do way more advanced things. And this is why I do this on my best images. So now you can see we've just started this new action and we're recording down here. And when we're done, we can click stop. So if I were to do, let's say I went down here and I created a curves layer mask and I gave it a little bit of adjustment, like, you know, maybe a little bit of F curve or something like that, right? Okay, so I've done a little curve. And if you look at the action, you can see that it recorded that curve with all its settings. Now, if I select that action one we just made and push play, it's going to run that action, and I could do it over and over and over again. So you may have seen the first distinction. If you do a preset in, let's say, Lightroom or Capture One that adjusts the curves, it adjusts the curves. And then if you do another preset that adjusts the curves, it changes those curves to the new setting. This is great for workflow, and you guys know that I make amazing presets like Filmist and things like that that I get really passionate about. But it's different. When we go to Photoshop, we can stack things. If you use Photoshop, you probably already know this. And if you use my actions in particular, you know that in my actions, I'm doing things that no one's doing in actions. I'm doing really nuanced, complex things like classic platinum and emulsion effects, like the new tools in Alchemist, like Pictorialist, and doing these really complex layering and mixing. And here's the thing, you can record complex things into actions, and sometimes it takes a lot of tweaking and time to do advanced ones. But what I'm getting at here is it doesn't stop there. Now, bear with me in this because we're going somewhere fast, and this isn't going to be complicated. When you really want to do master level editing, you need to go further than you can do with a raw editor. So let's say I take this image and I go into an action pack like pictorialist, right? We saw that we could build a simple action. But what I often get questions on is people get pictorialist or alchemist or lumist or any of these action packs that I'm making. They're doing advanced things. And they're like, okay, how can I do more and combine those? You can see if I run the pictorialist start action here, it doesn't change the image that much, but it just built a complex and very organized group of layers, blending modes, and all this stuff. So it's the setup for pictorialist, which allows me to do these looks like Stieglitz and Hamilton and Orton, but in ways that's way more than I would ever get in Lightroom. So let's say I run the Hamilton action. Now it's going to see all of these layers, and it's going to do all these modifications and give this nice, soft, complex Hamilton, David Hamilton kind of look. Now if I went and said, no, remix this to the New York version of Hamilton. Okay, so it's going to remix that, and it's not building it again, it's just making the effect even more complicated. Now look at all this. This would take, even for an experienced Photoshop user, if you knew everything you were doing, you would spend 30 minutes building all this, and it just built it in seconds. Okay, so yes, Gavin, we all get that you can do complex things in Photoshop, but I don't think people realize how complex of things I'm actually doing. And this is why I get really nerdy about building actions and why the action packs I make are like absolutely nothing else on the market. Because most people say, oh, I can do a layer and a mixing and a blur and a blending mode, and that's their action. But let me show you, this is actually a question I got recently. One of the new things in Alchemist, and that you see in a lot of my packs, is some sort of a mixer. So if we say if we look at the master portrait master mixer, and you open this action, you expand it, you can see that mostly what it's doing is playing actions, right? So it's using the building blocks from within this own group, that is all the actions of Alchemist that allow you to do blurs and mixes and blends, and those by themselves are an effect, but then it's combining those, and as part of the action it combines one, and then it adjusts the opacity and maybe makes some tweaks. So anytime you run this, one action and then another action is never the sum of the rest. That is to say, if I run Master Portrait, watch what's happening in the layers. It's going through and it's running 4 or 5 different actions within that action. And now you can see we have this master mix, and there's all these groups within it. Each of these represents a separate effect. You could click each one and adjust the opacity of it. And so they're not only all running perfectly in just a few moments to create the effect, they also are still retaining full control. And this is where a lot of people that don't really know actions inside and out make a mistake, because their actions don't talk to each other. If you run an action and then run another one, it errors out because it's looking for a layer, or there's a duplicate layer name or something like that. And so a lot of actions will run an effect and flatten the effect. They'll make a flat layer. A lot like plugins do. This is why plugins are super limiting, because you open a plugin, it's kind of slow, you got to go through and adjust it, and then it just saves an effect out as a flat layer. You don't have any real control. Actions are way more powerful than most Photoshop plugins. And this is why when people start using my actions, typically they realize how powerful they are, and then they'll be like, oh no, I don't need plugins, I need actions. A recent question I got about the Alchemist 3 release is the idea of making your own master mixers. I'm going to pull the actions panel out separately. I'm going to pull the actions panel out separately for this because I think it'll make it a little easier to zoom in on. So for example, let's say I wanted to make another master mixer preset. I could click this one here, drag it down to the plus icon at the bottom, and it would make a duplicate, right? So this is when you're out of button mode. And I could say master mixer test, I could call this, okay? Now you can see that it's a duplicate of what I just copied, right? But I could take all those steps from this and then go down here to the delete icon and delete those steps. So now I could say, here's Master Mixer Test. And I could go down to here and click record, just like we did when we were building a curves action. Now I can actually play actions. So if I click on Black Mist 1/8, let's say, and I play that action, and then I click on Matte Contrast Layer, and I play that action, okay, you can see it's recording those into this mixer that we did. So we're doing actions within actions. Now if I click on a layer and adjust the opacity, and I click on my curves layer and I adjust the curve a little bit, see what's happening? It's recording all those personalizations here. Okay, so let's stop our recording, and we just made this. So if I press play, it's going to run it. And if I press play again, it's going to run it. Now it's starting to look bad because we're stacking up. Stacking in actions is great, but there's limits. But here's the beauty. You can stack and stack and stack. But then you might control the opacity of each layer or group to 10 or 15%. So you might just take a little bit of this effect and a little bit of that effect. Sure, in Lightroom or Capture One, we can apply a preset and then we can adjust its opacity. We can make a layer and then adjust its opacity, right? And it's cool. We can copy and paste those settings, which you can't really do in Photoshop, but you can build a combo like I did here with master mixers. So what this means if you're building so on a simple level, if you use an action pack like mine, like Alchemist 3, you could go to the actions panel and you could make a copy and kind of clear out what's there, and then you could record your own version of your own master mixer that you like. Maybe there's 3 or 4 effects that you really love in Alchemist and you use those all the time. So you can record those. So once you've built your mixer, you could even go and you could save those actions out as a variant, right? Or probably even a better way, if you want to make your own mixers, would be to take what you've just made and let's drag it into this other folder, this test set we made, right? And then you could click here and you could save those as your own workflow actions as a backup on your computer, just in case later you need to reload them. And now anytime you click this, it's going to run all the commands that you made. Now here's the thing to remember, if you're doing actions within actions. So if you say play Black Mist 1/8 from Alchemist, well, if I were to change the name of Alchemist, or if it wasn't there, that action would fail because it's not going to see that effect. So don't do things like change the names of the action pack. These little details actually let you do these sweeping broad things. Okay, let's go back to button mode. And you can see that by doing this, you have all this control. So I could do black room, right? Why use black room over Silver 5, for example, or a black and white tool in Lightroom, or a black and white plugin? Well, for the same reason. Sure, I'll do my basic black and whites with presets from Filmus or from Silver, but if I want to do an advanced, more atmospheric black and white, I'll come in here and I'll run this. And then it also has the same kind of combos, right? Here they're called Foundry combos. And I could run this Earthborn combo and it would run a whole bunch of actions from Blackroom and give me my overall black and white conversion effect, but with a lot more nuance and complexity. Now, you might notice that color coding. You might also notice that you can drag these sets around so that when you go to button mode, whatever you're using right now shows up at the top. You can actually click the 3 little dots when you're on an action, and you can click action options. And it's in action options that you can set color coding and things like that, even shortcuts for an action. But let's close this out with the crux of the matter. What I'm getting at here is not that you have to be using my actions, but if you are, you can build on combos and things like that I've made and duplicate those and make your own versions of them pretty easily. But even if you're building your own actions or you're downloading free actions off the internet, and oftentimes, yes, they suck, you may need to come in and modify those and tweak them and make them work for you, because most of the actions out there do not have the kind of refinement that I'm showing you today. And so if you look in Pictorialist and you look at an action like the Hamilton action, there are a lot of things happening. There's selections and there's blurs and there's blending modes. But at the end of the day, you can go through and work with all of these. You can actually click these check marks if you want to experiment, and you might say, oh, I want to run an action, but without that Gaussian blur. And you might want to make your own version of a action you downloaded from the internet. Maybe somebody used too much blur and you want to see what it's like without that blur. Or maybe you want to adjust it. In current versions, you can actually double click that step and it will bring up its appropriate dialog box, and then you could adjust that, which I won't do here because I don't want to change it. It works good the way it is. And then click OK. And it wouldn't just apply it, it would actually change that step in the action. So if I run Pictorialist on this, I've done a Lightroom process on it. I run Pictorialist and maybe I do the Hamilton look. And now it builds them all vertically. This is key too, and a lot of actions don't do this. If you're building actions, do this. Every layer is going up, right? It doesn't have to flatten ever. It just keeps stacking. Then it makes a group of layers. It puts them in a group, and then it puts a layer on top of that and makes a new group. And so what happens when we do this is if I keep adding effects, or let's say I switch to the Stieglitz look, it's now going to modify those layers to this Stieglitz black and white look, but also it's going to leave some of those things that we added before from the Hamilton look. It just keeps stacking and building layers. So you can see across all my different action packs that this is how I do it. If I run HDF Mist 1/4, it runs this simple action. It puts the layers together and it puts them in a group. That way they're nice and organized, and I can adjust them as a layer or as a group and, for example, turn their opacity up and down. But let's say you downloaded an action like this and you wanted to modify it or kind of make it your own. Now, in the case of a lot of my actions, you probably won't need to. You'd probably be better off spending your time stacking them up and making your own combos because they are really, really well refined. But you could. And a lot of actions you get online won't be what you want. So you could click all these different steps. You see how powerful this little action panel is? It's very unassuming, but there's a lot going on in here. So you could click and say, hey, I like HDF mist, but because of the resolution of the files I'm working with, I want an 8-pixel blur instead of a 6, right? So you need to click a layer that you can actually run a blur on, not just like a mask. So let's click this. Now I could double click this and say, well, make this 8 pixels and click OK. And now that effect has been changed to 8 pixels. And I'm going to change it back so I don't mess with the perfection that is in that little action because I spent a lot of time building that. You even have options up here where you can allow tool recording, for example. So if you turn on tool recording, it will actually record a brush. If you paint a dot, for example, that will be recorded as an absolute in the action. And you actually see these kind of things happening in actions like Alchemist 3 as well, where I'm doing selections and then modifying those selections. Sometimes selections are based on subject or color because I know as I build those actions that they can't be absolute to the image I'm testing on. They also have to work when you put them on your image. So I've spent 15 years of my career building ever more advanced Photoshop actions, which is why I don't think I'm being arrogant and saying there are no actions on the public market that I know of that are doing what these packs like Pictorialist and Alchemist and Loomis are doing, live zone maps and building combos. But what I'm also saying is whether you're taking these or making your own or modifying actions that, I kind of like this action I downloaded for free off the internet, but it's wrong, you can actually come in here, adjust it, move steps around, delete a step. Now, it's very easy to break it and make it all fall apart. So if you're building actions or modifying actions, you want to have a saved copy on the computer. In the case of my actions, you can really go to town because if you screw something up, you can always just reload them or re-download them from your account, and that's no problem. My point here is not that if you use actions like mine, you have to build your own. In fact, I'm spending so much time building these so that you can come into Photoshop and not just be stuck in the raw editor and do these far more advanced edits on your best photos without having to stress or overthink about Photoshop. I made this video for those of you who want to understand a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes so that if you want to make your own variants or combos in particular is probably what you're most likely to want to make is these combos. It's easy to do. When you're working, ultimately when you're working, you're going to want to be in button mode. But if you want to play around a little bit, just go out of button mode and you can go in and you can mix it up a little bit. You can make your own combos and you can make a combo in particular that works for whatever type of work you need to do. You're doing editing that is so far beyond what we're doing in Lightroom. You're doing a Photoshop edit that manually, even for somebody that really knows Photoshop like myself, would take me a half hour to build all these layers. And even then I wouldn't get the same result because I will sometimes spend hours figuring out how a certain blur interacts with certain types of blending modes and how that then combines with certain types of automatic masking that I'm building into an action. And so I'm not kidding when I say I will spend hours just tweaking one little thing. I don't want to do that every time. That's not how you be a master editor. And I know Photoshop and Lightroom and Capture One pretty much inside and out, but doing things more manually and slower doesn't make me better. When I find something that's amazing, I save it as an action or as a preset or something like that. And then I continue refining it and making it better, just like I do even in Filmus presets. But in Photoshop, it's a whole nother level of complexity and slowdown. And what happens is people don't want to use Photoshop because they're trying to do things manually. To use Photoshop for high-level editing in photography, you need to be using actions. One way or the other, it doesn't have to be mine. Okay, I hope you found this useful if you use any of my actions, or if you want to use them after seeing this, I'll put links in the comments. Check them out. You will not be disappointed. That's why they're guaranteed, or your money back. But if you're using other actions or making your own, I hope this genuinely helped you and understand that an action isn't like a preset. It's not just like, oh, let's make an action that makes a curve and then adjusts opacity. You can do really complex and nuanced things and combining and selections and blending and do really gorgeous, beautiful effects. And when you do them and you take those hours, and yes, I do spend that long on them to make one little effect, But then once it's saved, it's amazing. Adjust those opacities and those levels of layers, even play with blending modes and make your own variant in a combo of a certain look. So it's exactly the way you want it. And the beauty of Actions is that when you run a preset, it's kind of like just converts everything to the way that preset looks. Yes, you can do mods like we do in ModKit and things like that. But in Actions, you run one action, and then you run another action, and you run another action. And you adjust maybe a few settings and opacities within those. You just created a completely unique effect because there's tens of thousands of possibilities within one action pack like Alchemist. And so what you've done is you've created something by combining those together and mixing them and done something completely unique. And that is why Actions are so powerful, but also why Photoshop for the final edit on your best images is so powerful and important and will change your game, even if you're using an older version like CS6. And yes, all the packs I showed you today, I do maintain and develop those for CS6 as well. Hope you guys found this useful. We'll see you next time. Peace.